Someone is deeply in love with you, and the reason may unsettle you more than it comforts you. It has very little to do with who you believe you are. It has everything to do with what you awakened inside them without even trying. Once you understand this, it becomes impossible to ignore. Most people believe love begins with attraction, shared interests, good timing, or compatibility. Those ideas feel safe because they offer simple explanations. But the strongest emotional connections rarely begin in such logical places. They begin much deeper, in parts of the mind that most people never fully understand. Without realizing it, you stepped into a hidden part of their inner world. A place they had spent years avoiding. A place they had buried beneath routines, distractions, and carefully built defenses. You did not simply make them feel happy, you made them feel understood. That may sound beautiful, but it can also be frightening. When someone feels truly seen at their deepest level, something powerful happens. They do not just admire the person who awakened that feeling, they become attached to them in a way that is difficult to explain. The connection reaches beyond ordinary attraction and enters a place where emotions become intense, consuming, and difficult to control. Most people never recognize this process while it is happening. They think love is simply liking someone more than everyone else. But what is happening here is much deeper. You triggered a recognition inside them, a recognition of something they had hidden from themselves for a very long time. It was not something they expected to face. You became a mirror without meaning to. You did not perform for them. You did not carefully create this effect. You simply existed in a way that challenged their expectations. You showed them something they could not easily explain, control, or place into a familiar category. That is where everything started to change. For years, their mind had been protecting them. Certain desires remained hidden. Certain needs stayed buried. Certain truths were pushed far away from awareness. Then you appeared. Suddenly those walls no longer felt strong enough. What they feel is not simple. It is not clean. It is not fully conscious. It is a mixture of longing, fear, hope, confusion, and emotional intensity. You did not merely attract them, you disrupted them. And when the unconscious mind experiences disruption, it often interprets it as fate. The strange part is that you did not do anything extraordinary. You did not say the perfect words. You did not follow a formula. You did not intentionally try to make an impression. You broke an expectation. The human mind depends on patterns. It feels comfortable when everything behaves in predictable ways. But when someone appears who cannot be easily predicted, the mind becomes fascinated. You became unpredictable in a meaningful way. Not chaotic, not random, meaningful. You seem to represent something larger than yourself. That is when projection began. Slowly, they stopped seeing you only as a person. They began seeing you as an answer to a question they had never consciously asked, an answer to an emptiness they could feel but could never fully describe. Once that happens, the emotional connection changes completely. They do not simply fall in love with you, they fall into the experience of you. And that is why letting go becomes so difficult. Because letting go of you would require facing the part of themselves that you awakened. It would require confronting emotions, desires, fears, and truths that had remained hidden for years. The mind resists that process, so they continue holding on, even when it confuses them, even when it hurts them, even when it makes no logical sense. The unsettling truth is that you did not only awaken something beautiful inside them, you also awakened something unstable. When deeply buried emotions rise to the surface, they rarely arrive gently. They emerge with force. They distort perception. They blur boundaries. They create emotional intensity that feels completely real, even when it is not fully connected to reality. You can sense that intensity. You notice it in the way they look at you. You notice it in their reactions. You notice it in the strange feeling that something important is happening beneath the surface, even during ordinary moments. The complicated part is that they do not fully understand it either. This process is happening beneath conscious awareness. It is unfolding in a place where logic has little influence, a place where love and fear can exist at the same time, a place where desire and avoidance become tangled together. That is why their behavior often feels inconsistent. One moment they seem completely drawn toward you, the next moment they pull away. Not because their feelings disappeared, because their defenses activated. Something inside them sensed danger, not physical danger, emotional danger. The danger of facing a truth they are not ready to accept. This creates a cycle: desire followed by fear, closeness followed by distance, intensity followed by confusion, again and again. And whether you realize it or not, part of you can feel that cycle too. There is something different about this connection, something heavier, something more emotionally charged, something that seems to pull hidden parts of both people toward the surface. The moment this recognition happened, everything changed. Because what they recognized was never about your appearance, your status, or the role you play in their life. It was about what you symbolize inside their unconscious mind. You became connected to something they have been searching for, avoiding and needing all at the same time. That is why the connection feels so intense. That is why it feels difficult to explain. That is why it refuses to fit into ordinary definitions. You did not simply make them fall in love. You awakened something that had been sleeping inside them for years. And once something that powerful wakes up, it rarely returns to silence. It waits. It grows. It demands attention. And sooner or later, it forces the person to face what has been hidden all along. People do not fall in love with reality as often as they believe. Deep emotional attachment usually forms around meaning. It forms around symbols. And somehow, without realizing it, you became a symbol inside their mind. You came to represent something they lost long ago, or something they never received, or something they secretly believed they were never allowed to have. That is where this becomes difficult for them, because caring about you forces them to face a contradiction they have been carrying for years. One part of them wants to move closer, another part wants to run. One part feels drawn toward you, another part fights against that pull with equal strength. Not because they do not care, but because caring forces them to confront something they have spent their entire life avoiding. The conflict does not stay hidden. It begins to appear in their actions. You see it in their hesitation. You see it in the mixed signals. You see it in moments when they seem incredibly close, only to become distant without explanation. You feel the inconsistency. You feel the emotional confusion. You feel that strange sense that something is constantly pulling them toward you while something else is pulling them away. The truth is, they are not confused about you. They are overwhelmed by themselves. You activated a part of them that does not operate through logic. It operates through memory. It operates through emotion. It operates through desires they never fully acknowledged. And once that part becomes active, it begins demanding attention. Suddenly, old feelings return. Old experiences begin surfacing. Things they thought they had forgotten begin influencing them again. A deep sense of familiarity appears. A sense that this connection means more than it should. A sense that it matters in ways they cannot explain. At the same time, fear grows. The stronger the connection feels, the more unsettled they become. Their conscious mind wants certainty, it wants stability, it wants answers. But the unconscious mind wants something entirely different. It wants resolution. And resolution often requires confronting things that have remained hidden for years. That process is rarely comfortable. It creates tension. It creates inner pressure. It creates emotional conflict. Eventually, they decide they need distance. Not because they want to lose you, not because they stopped caring, because they believe distance will restore control. They convince themselves that stepping back will weaken the attachment, that time will calm the intensity, that space will bring clarity. But something unexpected happens. The distance makes everything stronger. Because when reality disappears, imagination takes over. And imagination is far more powerful than reality. Now you are no longer simply a person in their life. You become an image, a possibility, a symbol, a projection. You become connected to everything they cannot fully understand inside themselves. And projections have no boundaries. They expand, they grow, they become larger than reality, more meaningful than reality, more emotionally powerful than reality. That is why breaking free becomes so difficult, because they are no longer attached only to who you are. They are attached to what you represent. And what you represent touches something deep inside them, something they cannot easily replace, something they cannot easily ignore. But there is another layer to this. They do not trust it. They do not trust how powerful these emotions feel. They do not trust how quickly they appeared. They do not trust how deeply they affect them. Anything this intense feels dangerous. Anything this powerful feels costly. Their mind immediately begins looking for reasons to resist. Doubt appears. Fear appears. Second-guessing appears. Not because the feeling is false, because the feeling is asking for something. It is demanding change. And change is exactly what they fear. If they fully accepted what they feel for you, they would have to face every part of themselves they have been avoiding. Every hidden wound, every old disappointment, every unmet need, every truth they buried long ago. The mind does not rush toward that kind of confrontation. It avoids it. It delays it. It distracts itself from it. So they remain trapped in the middle. Wanting you but resisting you, thinking about you but avoiding you, feeling everything but expressing very little. The tension grows, slowly, quietly, constantly. It does not disappear, it accumulates, day after day, moment after moment, until eventually something has to change. Because the human mind cannot hold that level of contradiction forever. Sooner or later, the pressure becomes too great. And when that happens, the outcome is unpredictable. Sometimes it leads to honesty. Sometimes it leads to withdrawal. Sometimes it leads to choices that seem irrational. Choices that make no sense from the outside. Because when unconscious emotions take control, logic loses its influence. Emotion becomes the dominant force. And that is when everything shifts. That is the moment when they can no longer pretend this is temporary. The moment when they can no longer dismiss it as simple attraction. The moment when they are forced to acknowledge that something deeper has been happening all along, whether they are ready or not. Because what was awakened inside them is not superficial. It is not passing. It is not something that disappears through avoidance. It demands resolution. And every form of resolution comes with a price. The question is not whether they will face it. The question is what they are willing to sacrifice to avoid facing it. At a certain point, the mind stops negotiating. Suppression has limits, and those limits have already been crossed. You can feel it in the silence. You can feel it in the pauses between interactions. You can feel it in the unspoken tension that never completely disappears. It remains there, waiting, growing, building pressure beneath the surface. Because what is happening inside them is no longer stable. The emotional weight continues increasing, and pressure always searches for release. But release does not always arrive in a healthy form. Sometimes it arrives as clarity, sometimes it arrives as collapse. That is what makes this so difficult, because what they feel is no longer simple attraction, it is confrontation. A confrontation with parts of themselves they spent years avoiding, parts shaped by rejection, parts shaped by disappointment, parts shaped by beliefs they accepted as truth long ago, beliefs that convinced them they were not enough, beliefs that convinced them they were too much. Beliefs that convinced them love was unsafe. Then you entered their life. And without realizing it, you challenged every one of those beliefs. You contradicted the story they had been telling themselves. You exposed possibilities they never expected to consider. But the mind rarely accepts contradiction peacefully. It resists. It fights back. It twists reality in order to preserve familiar patterns, because accepting this connection would require rebuilding the way they see themselves. And that process feels threatening. Not physically threatening, psychologically threatening. It feels like losing a version of themselves that has existed for years. So instead of fully accepting the healing, they split around it. Part of them moves closer, part of them moves away. One side craves connection, the other side craves protection. One side wants intimacy, the other side wants control. The closer they feel to you, the more exposed they feel within themselves. And exposure feels dangerous, not because of you, because of what it reveals. You have become more than a person in their story. You have become a challenge to the identity they created to survive. And survival identities do not disappear easily. They defend themselves, they protect themselves, sometimes aggressively, sometimes suddenly, sometimes in ways that seem completely irrational. That is why they create explanations. Stories that make the connection feel smaller than it is. Stories that make it easier to manage. Maybe it is temporary. Maybe it is nothing serious. Maybe it will fade. Maybe they are imagining it. But those explanations are not designed to uncover the truth. They are designed to contain it. Because fully understanding what they feel would require admitting that this connection is real. And not just real, transformative, more powerful than anything they expected, more meaningful than anything they prepared for. That is where the tension becomes almost impossible to ignore. Because no matter how much they analyze it, question it, or resist it, their deeper self continues responding. Their body responds. Their emotions respond.